Good morning, good morning, good morning. It is 6:38 a.m. on Monday, the 17th of July, the year of our Lord 2023. This is the Wolfman Method, Lesson 3, Just Standing. This is about standing meditation. Now, there's an introduction which explains what enlightenment is, and why we're doing the Wolfman Method in order to try to get enlightened, or more accurately, to try to get into alignment, and then hopefully we will get so consistent in our alignment that it will create the illusion of enlightenment. Then there's the first lesson, Just Sitting, in which I explain how to just sit in order to get quiet, in order to get in alignment. Then there's the third video, the second lesson, which is the allowing of channeled speech, which is something that happens naturally once you've been sitting, taking sitting practice for long enough to get quiet enough. The channeling happens automatically, but you also have to not resist it, because if you resist it, it won't happen. A lot of us in sitting practice think that we're not supposed to be talking and thinking, and that's resistance against the channeling, and so the channeling won't happen in that resistance. So if you're at this, it's okay if you're jumping ahead, but, you know, and just to see what's coming. But if you're at the point in the coursework where you actually need this lesson, just standing meditation, what that should look like is that you've been sitting for long enough and you've actually been channeling a bit. And so you're fairly consistently channeling, and you're ready to add to your practice, because I've asked the students of the Wolfman Method to do just sitting meditation practice for an hour a day, and then that naturally evolves into channeling, and so you've got an hour a day worth of practice. Whether that is, I mean, it's just sitting, because when you're channeling, you're just sitting, and you know, Spirit is doing all the speaking. So what you're doing is actually just sitting, although, as discussed before, Spirit is you, so the language around it gets a bit confusing, but that's fine. So at this point, channeling is happening enough while you're just sitting, and you have a practice of an hour a day of seated meditation, just sitting. And channeling is happening enough that, and you have the impulse or the desire to add more practice. And so now, if you're at this stage in the coursework, I'm going to ask all of the students of the Wolfman Method to add another hour of practice to what they're doing. So you're going to be practicing 2 hours a day. An hour of sitting and an hour of standing. And just standing is almost no different than just sitting. You stand, you don't move, you don't think, you breathe and you blink, you don't speak. And if you're already channeling in the just sitting, there's a very good possibility that you will start channeling speech in your very first standing meditation. You will probably, if you're channeling while seated, you will probably be channeling while standing. There's very little difference between seated meditation and standing meditation as far as you're concerned. It does change the dynamic so that what comes through can be different. Now, the speech will not change. And don't get ahead of yourself. You have to just stand with no hope. no witness and no reward for a while, and then the thing that comes next will come next. But so that you understand why we should stand whatsoever, it's because there is a rooting that happens with just sitting, where if you're just sitting, especially cross-legged, my experience is that below the waist, I begin to feel like a root, you know, or a foundational pillar or whatever, something immobile. And if there's any movement that comes through, it generally comes from the waist up. If you are standing, then there is less resistance to movement in your posture. You may be completely non-resistant to movement while you're just seated as far as your mind is concerned, but your body has natural resistance to movement because you are seated. And so there's just more weight and gravity. Now, if you're standing, you're already standing, and it's easier for the spirit to move you. And so we already know that after standing practice comes in, there's the allowing of channeled movement. And then there's the blending of channeled movement and channeled speech. For some of us that have a difficult time walking and chewing bubble gum, allowing the speech and the movement to come in can be a little bit difficult. And so the focus of this, though, is the just standing. So if you think you know what to do to just stand, you're probably right. You just stand, don't speak, don't move, don't think, don't resist. Observe what happens. A couple of tips. I mean, stand in whatever position is comfortable for you, but a couple of tips for me is that you want to kind of gaze out to the horizon, or wherever the horizon would be, if you can imagine it, if you're indoors. You don't want to lock your knees, which means soften your knees a little bit, lower your center of gravity, have your weight, again, stand in whatever position you feel led to stand in. But if you don't know how to stand, I'll tell you. So if you already know how to stand, you don't have to do any of this. But if you are unsure of what posture to stand in, you know, put your shoulders back, curl your fingers, put a little spring in your knees, so like lower your center of gravity, soften your knees a little, bend your knees just slightly so that they're not locked straight and stiff. And don't stand like a concrete pillar, stand like a tree that can sway in the breeze. Well, the trees don't move themselves, but they do move. Basically. So you stand like a tree, and you just stand. And I'm asking again, in the same way, I'm asking for an hour. If you can't do an hour, do as much as you like, you know, 5, 10, 20 minutes, 45 minutes, 30 seconds, or if you just want to establish the practice, just establish the practice of just standing. And so set the time that you're going to do it, or the time of day that you're going to do it, or the time in your schedule that you're going to do it. If it's not a specific time, put a place for it in your schedule. You know, maybe it's at the end of your just sitting practice, or maybe you want to split it up. But if you don't want to actually take the time, whether even if it's 5 minutes, if you don't want to do all that, then just establish the place marker in your routine and just go to the place where you're going to stand, get into your stance, and be like, yes, this is my stance, this is the place I'm going to stand, that's it. I've touched it, it's in my routine, and then I will, when I feel like it, I will allow the practice to grow. So again, similar to the just sitting, this is what you do. You do the just sitting, Spirit does the movement. and the speech. You do the just standing, spirit does the movement and the speech, but these practices are, you know, progressive, and so you're sequential. You start sitting for a while. When you've sat for a while, then it's God's turn, or the other half of you's turn, whichever way you want to look at it. And you want to avoid any kind of resistance, and the resistance that seems most likely is trying, like, to want the thing to come. It could take years. Every individual is different. If you are ready to go, it could happen the first time. If you are not ready to go, then what you're doing is getting ready to go. And so, like I said, we bump into things in life, things and people, and they create resistance in us. And we have to soothe that. They create confusion, and they create reaction and noise and resistance. And when we practice sitting and when we practice standing, we allow ourselves to get quiet. And when we get quiet enough, the thing that is meant to happen will happen. And of course, channeling is going to look different for everyone. But standing seems to be more likely to produce movement, and sitting seems to be more likely to only produce speech. And so this is the video about standing, and that's really all the more I have to say about it. Just a final reminder that the final reminder is that there is formal practice and there is informal practice. And if you're at this stage in the coursework, you are doing an hour of sitting and you are working towards an hour of standing practice. That's your formal practice. 2 hours a day, it's a lot to ask, but this is enlightenment we're talking about, you know. So if enlightenment is more important to you than anything else, then I'm asking, and you want to use this method, I'm asking for 2 hours a day. It's not me asking for 2 hours a day, it's you. And it's the universe asking. If you want to get enlightened, it's you asking yourself for 2 hours a day. And it's the universe, which is you, asking you for 2 hours a day. But it's coming through me, because we're all one. We're all the universe. The universe is using my mouth to tell your ears that it's asking itself for 2 hours a day of practice. And so, but that's the formal practice. The informal practice eventually becomes your entire life of getting quiet and allowing spirit to speak and move through you. And so don't wait until you've done all the other lessons to start just existing. And when you get done, the best time to do it is either as soon as you wake up in the morning. You can remind yourself of it at night, and then as soon as you wake up in the morning, you set the intention to just exist and to allow the spirit, your higher self, your unconscious mind, or whatever, to allow, wherever it comes from, it doesn't matter where it comes from, but to allow this, your speech and your action to arise naturally from within you. And the only thing that you are doing is just existing. So that is the informal practice, the practice of just existing. And you do that, the best time to set this intention is at the beginning of the day, as soon as you wake up in the morning, having reminded yourself of it at night, or at the end of your formal practice. So you sit for an hour, or you stand for an hour, or you sit for an hour, and then you stand for an hour, and then you say to yourself, I am going to just exist and allow the universe to move me, to speak through me. And that's how the just existing part works. So that's going to be in every lesson. Remember that when the formal practice begins or ends, your life begins. And so obviously it's a lot more difficult there's a lot more noise. And so it's fairly easy to release resistance in a container of meditation, but out in the marketplace, it's fun, man. It's challenging. It's gonna it's going to challenge you. Trying to stay quiet is a neat trick when you're out in the marketplace. So yeah, final takeaway, don't forget about your informal practice. And I'm now asking you to do an hour of sitting, which you should already be doing if you're watching this video, and then to do an hour, to work towards eventually doing an hour of standing. Don't force it, don't fight it, and be comfortable with long periods of silence and stillness. May your hearts be happy. May your minds be clear. May you find satisfaction in all your endeavors, and ultimately find satisfaction. Kon omne, kono yoko.